Welcome, another episode, Dr. James Beckett Sports Card Insights. Thanks sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Tops, Panini, and Upper Deck. Great sponsors, patronize those. While I've got Ben Wilson here, it's good to say that there are several other outstanding podcasts that I listen to, including About the Cards. So, Ben, we had an origin issue a little while ago, but today this is kind of anything goes, dueling questions format that I've done a couple times now, and it's a little more dynamic. It's kind of like Hobby Hotline, where Ben and I were both on. Ben was one of the hosts, I was a guest, but as I pointed out, I didn't really get to ask questions. They were asking the questions. So the fairness of dueling questions, back and forth. Ben gets to go first. Ask me a question. I'll try to answer reasonably succinctly, and then it's my turn, and we'll go back and forth. So welcome, Ben. Thanks for your service to the industry, and welcome to the show, and hit me with your first question.
Sure. Thank you once again, Jim. I really appreciate being invited on. When Beckett was big in the 80s, it was extremely important for us to have a price guide to know the valuation of each card. Speed up. Now we're in 2020. Everybody's got access to all different ways of finding out in real time the fluidity of a card's market. Can Beckett in print and online, can they keep up? And does the hobby really need a price guide like we currently have with them in today's market?
I don't want to be misquoted here, but it's impossible for a person, no matter how talented, to completely keep up. The data is so massive now, so there has to be some aspect of the data that's out there for the really expensive cards. I think lots of different people besides just the Beckett Media people are trying to get a handle on what they're going for. But some of the cheaper cards, it's really hard to keep track of what's going on. What I've encouraged to do in this shelter in at home situation is branch out, and if you're trying to get some sense of whether something's a good deal or not, you ought to try to explore. In the old days, I think it was simpler. You just could look in our price guide, and we had a pretty strong market share, and you could have been done, say, in '86 when you got started. Sure. Nowadays, people are checking out eBay. They may, Heritage Auctions has their own research situation. PWCC has research of theirs. I said ComC, eBay, Beckett, Rob Ferris. There's any number of selling prices and buying prices, and I've encouraged people to use this time at home to explore different selling platforms and try to get a handle on these other ways that cards are priced to get an understanding. Even the SMR, which is not was not our thing, but there's different ways to get prices on graded cards. You need to know if those listings are considered to be conservative or considered to be more liberal. I mean, again, you're the economist. I just think more data is good, but there's too much data now, and you can't.
Sure.
You can't go to a show and then look up cards one at a time unless you're looking for really expensive cards. You've got to have a sense of am I way overpaying here, or is this a steal? Okay, tough question, Ben. Let's see. I've got a bunch of sponsors, and I list them out every time, and I don't really go into it a great deal, but I talk to them on some level over when I contact them, and I don't know that I have a whole lot of influence anymore in the industry. But if you were me, what kind of feedback would you give to an individual or a group of the sponsors that I have? I have these 3 card companies that all have kind of monopolistic single sport licenses. I've got a couple of really good auction companies, a couple of card stores, and then ComC, and then the Beckett Media entity. So is there anything you'd want, any burr, in something you think they ought to fix, or that could be improved, or you'd like to put on the table?
If I, we don't have sponsors on our podcast because we don't want to be seen as, a shill. We want to be able to speak openly and freely about what they're doing great, which we do, but also things that we're.
That's why I'm asking the question. So
yeah, and
I'm not happy with my sponsors. No, I am happy with my sponsors, but right. They're not perfect. And I'd rather hear it from your perspective. What's something they could do better, or that they're not seeing?
Really, without being in a conference room with them, I don't know. I can't speak for what they do and don't do. I know that their interaction, specifically on social media, is limited. I know that all of the companies have it. I think Upper Deck is fantastic. I've had a lot of conversations. You see them very active, but Topps and Panini not as much. I think they could be retweeting hits because really they're promoting their own product.
Yes.
I could see them not necessarily wanting to, if I say I just got this great new Topps card and I show it to them, if they were to retweet it, is that seen as endorsing my Twitter timeline? And maybe they don't want to be affiliated with that. I spoke with one of their previous employees, and she's like, I never really saw it that way. If I saw something I liked, I retweeted it. And I think their customer engagement, by and large, as a whole, because it is an oligopoly, they do have the exclusive licenses, but there's only a handful of companies. It's not like you and I can decide tomorrow that we're going to go start making cards out of our houses. And it's the auto industry, it's the soda industry. There's oligopolies all around us. And I think that the customer engagement, asking us, they don't have to listen, but having the pulse of the collector, I think, is either not a concern to them by and large, or it's just an afterthought. And I think it's extreme. I know they do things at the National, they question and answers, but I think that if they were to listen a little bit more, and a lot of it's going to be fluff, a lot of it's just going to be on complaining because that's what we do. But there's some really good thoughts. Steph had one last night on our podcast about the turn back the clock, the Topps Now. If you go to a 1996 memory, why not do it on a 1996 card? It's a good thought. So I just think they should be a little bit more engaged.
Well, yeah, I think they could. I hope they'll receive that. Basically, if you throw some good ideas at them, I hope they'll take them under advisement, and that's part of the power of the digital media. That anybody can grab a microphone, but you guys have kind of stood the test of time, and you have a following. I hope that they're listening. When I talk to the different people at the different each of the companies, I've had them on, and they're not trying to mess up or anything. It's just there's a lot of noise out there, and I don't regard your podcast as noise. I regard it as a clear voice, but they're hopefully just the voices of reason and helpful voices will emerge, and then if Upper Deck's doing a good job, that's one place where you would want the other companies to copy. If they're
right, exactly
job on customer service, then go ahead and copy away. So. Okay, your turn. Your turn for
sure. When are we going to see Dr. Beckett on Twitter?
I don't know. It's 2020. I don't know if it's going to be this century, Ben. Unless I actually on there. I don't. The thing I don't like about Twitter is the reason everybody else likes it. It's very timely, and it seems like you can kind of take on a life of its own. I'm very deadline oriented.
Sure.
So I have no trouble having a podcast every day, and it's 15 minutes, and I had deadlines every week for a different sport, and I've never really missed. But Twitter, I don't know what the deadlines are. It just seems like you're always on. And so I will, I've got a month. I can't do anything except sit in this office. So I will consider it. And, you can, we can talk about that offline, because I think I can't see how I'd be adding value. My podcast is more on more reminiscences and talking with other people about what's going on, whereas the Twitter just would seem pretentious for me, because I've been.
Gotcha.
Okay. Next question for you. Excluding your own podcast and excluding Hobby Hotline and excluding this Sports Card Insights that I'm doing, who else is doing a podcast that you think is a must listen? What are the another podcast or two out there that you really enjoy? And not that you're going to copy them, but that you think, wow, I really like what this podcaster is doing. Because there's a bunch coming out, and I think a bunch of them are, but what in particular has stood out as being one of the pioneers?
I love a good friend of mine. I consider him more like a brother. Is Drew Herndon's "Let Me Get That Potograph." There's been a few times where he'll text me and go, "Hey, did you listen to the show?" I'm like, "Yeah," and he's like, "What'd you think?" And I'm like, "We covered the same topic, and you asked the questions. You cover the topic the way we should have on certain things, and that's a credit to the people that he knows, the information that he's able to gather. Sometimes we just touch on it, where he can go a little bit more in depth, and I love his. He touches a wide array of topics as well, much like us. But he's got some great insight. I love The Hype, which is the guys Dan and Doug over at Mojo Break. We couldn't do what they do, and the reason is because the breakers.
They do.
Yeah,
Drew is I think he's kind of an investigative journalist.
He is. Oh yeah, and he's covered some really hard topics.
Yeah.
And Doug and Dan touch everything, they see everything, they break everything, and their thoughts are very specific but very poignant and very precise, and again, I love, I call them really close friends as well. So those are really the two that I try not to miss. The third would probably be somebody that's been featured on our show quite a few times. He's our pinch hitter. If one of us can't make it to a show, we call up Mike Summer, Wax Pack Hero. Yeah. And
well, again, there's I didn't want you to list three because that would fill up the medal stand. There are others that you didn't mention that I really like. And, John Newman is going to think, well, you when were you going to get to me? And Eric Norton, same thing. So and there's a bunch of others, but it's wonderful to have this embarrassment of riches, to have so many podcasts that we really enjoy and look forward to getting. And most of them are once a week, and a lot of them have co-hosts.
Sure,
I think it's interesting, which I occasionally do. What was that? That was my question for you?
That is correct. Do we have time for one more?
Your turn. And it's probably the last.
Gotcha. So you lived during the junk wax era, which, kind of casts a black mark just because of the name. It sounds like it's a bad era to have collected, but you were an industry leader at that time. Are we in a current junk wax era of sorts, comparatively speaking, to what was going on between, say, 86 and 93?
Yeah, I know you're not blaming me for the quote unquote junk wax era, but I mean, basically, it just happened. It's not like people, ran the presses, to flood the market. People said they wanted it. And that's the similarity to what was happening until a few weeks ago, is that there were people out there begging card companies to produce more product. And the difference is, I think, for the most part, was a pretty high percentage of product being produced and opened, and that's thanks to the breakers. Okay, now what's happening to all these base cards? I don't know, but that's frankly not much being figured out in value for a lot. I mean, I know you care about them. I care about base cards, but a lot of the people now they're looking for the big hits. So again, the availability of cards was so extreme, and so many card shops back in the day that, again, the card companies, they're capitalists. And they had it wasn't just the card companies, the players associations and the leagues, the teams, the more cards were printed up, the more they made. And so everybody so the problem is it got into the black tulip situation or whatever it was unsupportable at that point. And one of the silver linings of the COVID-19 could be that instead of the bubble popping, some air has been let out. And if that's the case, that'd be good, because it's hard to go to your Walmart or wherever you're looking for cards besides your local card shop and try to pick up stuff when there's no games being played. It's got to put a damper on what was probably, to use one of your economic terms, some irrational exuberance that I think had a little bit of overheat. So it's either going to be a massive correction or a more reasonable correction. And if that happens, I think we'd both be happy about that.
Absolutely.
Crash. We're looking for something where people can get back to really enjoying the hobby. And my sentiments are, I think my listeners know, I appreciate that you're more of a collector. Actually, you're completely a collector, I guess, not an investor at all. And I'm trying to be more balanced on that. But that means you're in here for the enjoyment. And I think that's terrific. So thanks, Ben. Thanks, listeners. We went back and forth with some questions. Hope you found it interesting. I did. I'll get Ben back on at another time, and we'll talk about some fancy economic stuff, as well as his love of the all things A's. So again, thanks, Ben. Thanks, listeners. Be back again tomorrow. Another episode.